This podcast was sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be tuned in. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. Vicars Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square, now on Zoom. And we're glad you're back with us again. I want to say hi to our great sponsor, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And once again, because things don't change that much in my life, my name is Rob Henderson, and I'm still the priest and rector of Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London.
That's right. Despite his best efforts, he can't get himself fired. And my name is Kevin George, and I'm the priest and rector at St. Aidan's Church. And can I just say about Dave Mullen and the funeral home and the plug you just gave him? The last bit is about the cremation. You really burnt that. That was great.
Oh, thanks very much.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. We need a sound effect of booing.
Boo!
And that guy's Ian. Hi, Ian.
Hi. Hello, I'm Ian.
All right. And today on the Vicars Crossing, we are thrilled to be able to welcome into the Zoom room today author and speaker and church planter Emily Scott. Hi, Emily. How are you?
Hello. How's everyone doing?
Good. Good.
Top
We're glad
drawer.
you're with us today. Whereabouts
glad
are
to
you?
be
Tell our listeners where exactly you are today.
So I live in Baltimore City, right in the center of the city, close to the train station.
All right.
Nice.
Very good. Very good. Well, we want to welcome you, and I know Kevin's going to give you more of a formal introduction coming up here in just a minute. We want to talk to you about the wonderful book that you wrote a little while back that we all really love, and some other things going on too. So, but before we get to that, we just want to check in with each other. Here in London, Ontario, we had like the massivest rainstorm we've seen in a while yesterday. That was something. I don't know if
Tornadoes.
We had two tornadoes just outside the city. One of them just went, I think, south of where I live in the city, not like a couple
Belmont,
of miles.
right?
Yeah.
It
Wasn't very far away. And I don't know if you saw the pictures I posted on Facebook, but we went outside. We kind of live at the bottom of our neighborhood's kind of in the lower part. And so it flooded. Yeah. And there were two city buses going by at the same time and shot all the water up everybody's driveway up to the front of the house. And the kids were out running around and playing. It was like, it was unbelievable, but I haven't seen that much rain for a while.
was a wild night. We were doing our book group. We were reading Diana Butler Bass's Christianity for the Rest of Us.
Right.
And I was right in the middle of talking about, this sort of the fact that we've abandoned this romantic notion of when church was ever this great thing and all that, and how that's all gone. Thanks be to God, we've released ourselves from being the empire so we can speak truth to it as Jesus intended and all that. And I just finished that when the whole thing went.
Yeah, that's right.
And everybody went. And I said, "So pay attention."
Yeah, he has spoken. Oh my God. Yeah, it was crazy. The other thing we did last night too, Kevin, was get together at your opportunity to organize a special forum last night, and that was I just want to say that was a wonderful hour and a half plus. Had over about, I think you said like 90 people that showed up to this last night.
So yeah, last night's event was called Justice, Kindness, Humility. It was an anti-racial forum with panelist Ariel Kayabega, who's a Ward 13 counselor here, who's originally from Nambia, who's articulated some of what she's faced as a public person here in the city, the emails and so on she's subject to, not to mention her own personal experience, waking every morning and getting ready to face the world, talking to her young boy about what he's facing. And then three of our colleagues and a couple of, Ariel has been on the podcast, but along with that, Steve Green, who's been on this podcast, who is at a couple churches up in Cambridge, and is a Black Canadian, and Hannah Scorer, who Rob and I have known for a long, long time, really. When I first met Hannah, she was a little girl at Christ Church in Amherstburg down in Essex County, and I was the priest at a church down there. And whenever we had any youth activities or children's activities, she was at everything. Yeah. And now she's a priest and assistant curate over at St. James Westminster, and she's of Asian descent. And and then one of our First Nations priests, Rosalind Elm, and it was curated or moderated by a woman named Saleha Khan, who is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Peel Regional Police. And so I introduced it and got it out of the way, and we all had a chance to listen, as Rob says, for over an hour to these folks speak. It was infuriating and heartbreaking and encouraging and fascinating and I don't know, there's not enough words really.
But transformative too, I think, for a lot of people. And I was chatting with one of my parishioners who was on it last night, and she said that she has now in her kind of diary, she wrote down 6 or 8 lines people said that she's carrying around with her all day now. Yeah. Just, living and breathing. And it was an eye-opening, transformative experience. So I'm sure a lot of people had that experience last night. So thank you for doing that, Kevin.
I was glad to put it on.
Thanks to all those guests that came to do that. Yeah. All right, Ian, what do you think? How's your brain working today?
Brain's always working.
Brain's on. Okay, brother. Here we go. So, Emily, this is our one of the favorite parts of our program of the Vicars Crossing, where we bring Ian a question about pretty much anything, and that's why we like to call this segment.
Ask Ian.
Ask Ian. Anything.
I still love.
Sorry, I need a tic tac.
I still love the campiness of that. I love the fact that we can't mix it in anymore, so we play it on a cell phone.
Here we go. Hurt my throat. Okay.
All right. So here, this one, your question today comes from Peter the Beekeeper.
Oh, lovely man.
Yeah. So Peter keeps bees, churchyard bees, nearby here where I'm recording from. And you can go on Facebook and look up churchyard bees, and Twitter and find churchyard bees, and you'll be getting tweets from the bees right here back at St. Aidan's Church. And Peter the Beekeeper has been very busy, and he is always fascinated by what you're doing. So straight out of the beehive comes this question today.
Right.
What, Ian, is your greatest fear?
Huh.
Other than middle-aged priests every week on the
Yeah. Like, is this like an existential fear or like a tangible fear?
I think you can pick either.
I hate spiders.
It's a good job
they're
you
the
didn't
worst.
say.
Oh, do you?
It's a
I
good
hate
job.
spiders.
It's a good job you didn't say bees. Okay, so he's done on an existential level. What's your greatest fear?
That's a harder question. I don't know. There's I think a lot of the times when people are like, "Oh, I'm afraid of eternity," or stuff like that, like it's what we don't know is what people are afraid of. And once we understand that, like, I don't know what's going to happen when I die. We're getting real deep on this right now.
I like it.
I don't know what's going to happen when I die, and I'm not really worried about it because no one knows. So it's nothing like you can just ask someone and they'll find out. Like it's you're afraid of it, but like there's nothing you can do about it. So why worry about it? Like you're going to die, which is a horrible thing to say, but there's no way to find out what happens next. Right?
Yeah.
We have theories and things like that, but really, like, who knows?
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
Robbie,
good. That's good.
what
Good
about
for
you,
you.
Rob? What are you afraid of, Rob?
What am I afraid of?
You're not afraid of your wife, Margie, because I just heard you yelling "ant" to her.
I was going to say,
I don't know how you still have teeth.
Right now, I'm afraid of ants because there's some ants in the house, and we can't get rid of the bloody ants. And every 5 minutes or so, I'm looking at the wall yelling "ant, ant." A lot of it's like, just to echo what Ian said. The truth is, we fear what we don't know. So if I fear anything, and I think this has kind of been the veil that's been lifted for me over this last couple of weeks, especially with the Black Lives Matter and everything going on, I'm fearing, but it's okay for now. I'm fearing that I'm uncovering things that I didn't know I'd been a part of.
Right.
Some of the systemic aspects of things in our culture and our society that I'm becoming more and more aware that I have taken part in unknowingly. Right. So the fear is that every day there's a new layer being peeled off here, but at the same time it's very transformative and strengthening as well. So that's where I'm at with that. Yeah.
What about you, Emily? Let's ask our guests. What do you fear?
Oh my goodness. Y'all just going straight for it here, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might as well.
That's the sort of hard-hitting questions you can ask.
Boom.
I can expect from Canadian bees.
Oh yeah.
The Canadian beekeepers are relentless.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you know what? I know. I'm afraid of power. I'm afraid of the way
yeah.
that our nation in particular holds power. And it's fearful to me the way it gets entrenched, and people who have it won't let it go. That really, it
That's
feels like
such a good answer.
it feels like this endless need for people to always be protesting and asking for change. And like, as soon as you've kind of resolved one issue, another pops up, because we have this overarching issue of power and greed. I think greed's a big part of that too. So that scares me. I don't
That's
like that.
good.
Yeah.
That's such a good answer.
So do I have to say what I'm afraid of?
What about you,
Yeah.
Kevin? What are you afraid of?
Do I have to say?
Oh, yeah, of course
Yes.
you do. Yeah. We
You're
know where
part
you
of this
live.
podcast. Come on.
I am. I think it's just, in a way, it's a bit of a mix between what Emily and Rob said. The more I hear in these last couple of weeks, and the more here in Canada, we've entered into this conversation around systemic racism out of a response to what's happening in the United States, and realizing that we just don't have that lily white place that we sometimes profess to have. The more I learn about it, and the more I have opportunities to listen, the more I realize I've been a part of it. So I'm a little bit afraid of what that means. And I think that is in part because of power. I think because I'm a straight, white, middle-aged, married man, cisgender guy, I'm the poster child for privilege. And so I have power because of that privilege. And I'm afraid that I don't always use it for the right reasons. Yeah. So that's a part of a revelation right now. That's a veil that's being lifted back. It's not because I'm not trying necessarily, but as we learned last night in the forum that we had, it really doesn't matter if it's intended or not. If we don't actually know what's going on, then things aren't getting where they need to be. So I want to be an ally. So I'm afraid that if that's going to happen, I need to give something up. So,
yep. Well, that's good. That's good. Well, that's a good kickoff to the show, and we're gonna go even deeper than that, Emily. How about that? Can we even imagine? Yeah. So again, we're so thrilled that you're here with us. I want to give Kevin a chance to introduce you to our listeners more formally. So, Kevin, would you?
I will be glad to do that. Your bio is straight off your webpage. So if something's changed, you need to let me know. Okay.
I think it's good. You don't have to read the whole thing, by the way.
I won't read the whole thing. Okay.
So,
but as you heard, that Emily is a church planter and an author. Right now, her book, For All Who Hunger, Searching for Communion in a Shattered World, was just released this spring. I got it on Kindle almost as quickly as I could. I don't know where. I think I popped up on it on Sarah Miles had tweeted something about it maybe, or something like that. And I was like, oh, well, I always go on recommendations. So you'll find Emily a Lutheran pastor, ELCA, not Missouri Synod. And that's important because I've been on the wrong end of that stick. So Emily believes that Christian practice holds out rich possibilities that call us to reach out across boundaries in love, learn through discomfort, this is what we were just talking about, and build relationships that bring God's realm close. Queer and genderqueer, she's committed to building communities of faith that dismantle fear, hate, affirm LGBTQ plus people, and confront racial injustice. Currently, Emily is serving as the founding pastor of Dreams and Visions, an imaginative spiritual community rooted in the LGBTQ plus community. And she's called to this work by the Delaware, Maryland Synod. Worship at Dreams and Visions is soulful and spirit-led. That's the hope. From 2008 to 2017, you may have known of Emily, or you certainly, if you're in church circles, would have heard of her work. She served as the founding pastor of St. Lydia's Dinner Church in Brooklyn, where worship is a full meal shared around a dinner table. She and the congregation were involved in combating police brutality and advocating for affordable housing. St. Lydia's and her work there sparked a wider dinner church movement, which I can say we also have made an effort at here, and we call it Bridget's Banquet. Anyway, she comes from Yale, so she must be smart. Yale Divinity School. She even got awards and everything there. So she's like the best thing since sliced bread. and we're honored that you take time to come and be with us today. So thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, this will be fun. Well, Emily, I'd like to start off by asking you something about your recent church plant, because Kevin and I mentioned you're a church planter, which does not mean that you sit on a shelf. That's something totally different. So I want to talk about some of the work you've done here, and I want to start off by reading a short piece of scripture. This is something from Prophet Joel, who writes, "Then afterward I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female slaves, in those days I will pour out my spirit." I just think that's a great quote to kind of introduce a bit about your church plant, which is called Dreams and Visions. It's described on your website as a church in Baltimore that's awake to the realities of our world and alive to the possibilities of God. Together, we're creating an imaginative space of restoration where we find the courage to be our full selves. That is wonderful. Can you tell us a little bit more about this incredible community you're part of?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for reading that quote. That is where our name comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that it's such a wonderful scripture passage to have as your name, because whenever we hit something difficult, like, I don't know, a global pandemic,
for instance,
just to take an example, we have dreams and visions to fall back on, and that's always where we go. When things get tough, we dream and we imagine, and that's been a wonderful thing. So, for instance, we kind of made it through the first wave of quarantine from about March to Pentecost, and on Pentecost Sunday, we held what I was going to call a community meeting. But then I thought, like, well, let's call it a community dreaming, because that's actually who we are and what we do. And it really changed the whole tone of our time together to take us from a place of planning instead to dreaming. And I think the name's also important because, you know, we're a church in Baltimore, a pretty eclectic group of people from different backgrounds, and we have a lot of different stories. But Baltimore, I think, in many ways is a city that has been kind of robbed of the ability to dream through the impact of systemic racism, which is just kind of imprinted on our city. And the sort of claim, like, we're going to dream, and we're going to dream God's dream for the city is kind of bold, actually. So it's been fabulous to live into that. But right now we are, of course, in a different sort of space with COVID, gathering online. So that's looking very different. But when we gather in person, there's lots of eclectic music, and often it's very participative. We tell a lot of stories. After the sermon, we often have a response of some kind that could be making art or writing letters. We did writing letters to trans asylum seekers at the border and mailed those off. So there's all kinds of different ways that we've engaged the biblical text and the biblical calls, and try and just make it as alive as possible.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're finding adaptive ways to do that even in this quarantine time. You were talking about the letter writings, other ways. I think I saw on your webpage you are hosting some worship on Zoom and stuff like that.
Yeah, and actually we're hosting a lot of worship on Zoom. I mean, it's been so difficult for the congregation and for everyone. That we actually increased our worship services.
Wow.
Excuse me, and started having a midweek Vesper service, and went from meeting every other week to every week. And it was just kind of in an effort to create space for people to kind of share how they were feeling and share their anxieties. Right. And now after Pentecost, we've decided we're going to kind of go back to our routine, which is more around themes for worship and exploring a theme at each worship service. So I'm excited to kind of get back into that rhythm that we had established.
You said it's kind of an eclectic group. Where, you know, you plant this church, where do you meet these folks and these connections, and how does that kind of come about? Can you bring us to maybe a little bit of the genesis on how that all came about?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest and most important thing that I did when I first was a newcomer in Baltimore was volunteering at the Pride Center here. For a few months, I would go and sit at the desk every Wednesday night and answer phones and do things, and it completely changed my relationship to the city and allowed me to meet lots of folks that I wouldn't have met otherwise.
Right.
So I think as a church planter, we really have a different orientation that, first of all, there's no building to kind of go to, which is actually a benefit often. So we're always kind of pushing out into the neighborhood and being in the neighborhood, being with people, building relationships. And then that process kind of comes back around and feeds the work that you're doing. Not necessarily that every person I'm meeting out there will come to the church, but from every person that I meet, I learn something about the community and about the spiritual hungers of this community. So I was just listening and soaking it all up, and continue to do that. It's a huge part of my job, is that kind of responsive listening, and that informs the liturgy that's created.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, and that comes screaming out in your memoir, your book, For All Who Hunger, is I think that obviously the one thing that I learned reading it, and certainly just reading other stuff before your book about what you were doing, because as I said, we took some inspiration from it here, is that what's very clear to me is that you're a very good listener, and that you obviously spend your time. I mean, I was taken by the stories in the book about where you went to hang out and how you met people, and you were new to New York City, and you were new to the whole experience, and you tapped into your own emotions and your own loneliness, your own need for companionship and a sense of community. And I think that it was really, for me, it was very heartening, because I believe it's so much at the root of what we're called to be. One of the things that Rob and I have lamented in our own context, in an Anglican reality, is we get all these sheets every year to fill in. They're going to be screwed this year. But we fill in these statistical reports at the end of the year. But nobody asked me how many people I met at a bar.
Yeah.
Or how many conversations I had about spirituality with people who said, I don't know what I believe anymore. That I'll never see the cheeks of their ass on a church pew, but I'll have a meaningful conversation out there somewhere. So you do that very well. I want to just transition a little bit to the book. I'm just going to read a short section of it where you're describing, because for those of you who haven't read the book yet, in this book, Emily outlines what happened at St. Lydia's Dinner Church in Brooklyn, how it came to be. But as she does so, she also outlines what her own journey has been and what her life has been. It's a beautiful combination of laying out a pastoral call along with a memoir and a sense of what she was able to do because of who she is. And so you write in a book about the experience of moving to Seattle, and then you became a Seahawks fan. It doesn't say that in here, but I'm guessing. I mean, I don't know if you're a Patriots fan, but you can't be a Seahawks anyway. So it says, when I was a knock-kneed 12-year-old, my family moved across the country to Seattle. There we attended a hulking cinder block cathedral perched on an overhang, looming above the city. The choir wove fugal voices through the capacious sanctuary, pure and clean, the harmonies winding around each other. Faith was about beauty. God was a presence that waited just out of sight. No one taught me that if I just prayed harder, God would give me a boyfriend, or if I didn't get the role I wanted in the school play, I must have sinned. No one told me to invite Jesus into my heart. The God I encountered in the cavern of that cathedral lay hidden and waiting in the folds of our existence, revealed in moments of unpredictable transcendence. In that stark cathedral, I could detect God's beating heart pulsing beneath our rituals. It was not always easy to locate. We stood and sat down again, kneeled and prayed and crossed ourselves. It was rote, except for when it wasn't. Moments when my breath would catch. It happened when we moved up the aisle to receive communion, a procession of mismatched saints standing around the great stone altar, our hands outstretched and waiting. It happened sometimes when we sang together from the pages of a hymnal, blue bindings, loose with years of use. Once in a rare while, I looked over to see that my mother was weeping. There was so much beauty and grace, but sometimes I felt a distance between our rituals and that beating heart of God. The acolyte master instructed us kids to light the altar candles with military precision that made me jumpy, as if bowing on the wrong step on the way to the altar would render the Eucharist invalid. The candles, the flowers, and the communion all had to be perfect. The communion ware all had to be perfect. Church folks, you write, can focus on ritual so much that we lose track of God. We become entranced with a Pamel's pest, pardon me, I can't get that out today. Layers upon layers of thin paper, written and written and rewritten over centuries. We are transfixed by the scribblings of eons of traditions, the archives of how we've always done it. Yet God's heart is alive and therefore unpredictable, impossible to manage or constrain with writings or rules. Sometimes it frightens us, and so we try to tame God into something more manageable, something we can control. And this is where I really see my heart break open. After church on Sundays, my parents and I will go out for lunch on Capitol Hill, passing street kids, sitting on blankets, begging for change, their crumpled paper cups set before them. The kids had coal liner smudged around their eyes, pierced faces, hair sharpened into points. Next to them lay panting pit bulls with chain collars around their necks. At church, we had just celebrated a meal where everyone, the priest said, was welcome at the table. And now, as my parents and I sat down for lunch, kids just a little older than me were sitting hungry. 12-year-olds are literal creatures with noses for hypocrisy. Wouldn't Jesus have invited them for lunch? We claimed that communion would feed the hungry, but only broke a thin wafer. What would happen, I wondered, if we actually did what we said we were doing? So many things in this book that we could stay here and talk about them all day, to be honest. Wow. We usually, sorry, I'm on the wrong page of my thing here. So you did an incredible thing when you managed to plant that church, St. Lydia's. I wonder if you can respond to us with that, because to me, that section of your book, From Womb, sort of begins to ask that question: what would it look like if we actually did what we said we were going to do? And to me, St. Lydia's is a beautiful representation of that. So can you share with our listeners, with our audience, a little bit about that piece of the work, I guess, that piece of the book, sure, but also transition that into, talk to us about St. Lydia's and why it's such an incredible place.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you selected that that piece. I haven't heard it for a long time, but I think it does represent this kind of experience as a child of seeing that distance between this very radical Jesus who was preached about in my cathedral in Seattle, and the way that we live our lives, because we kind of, everything would change if we patterned our life after Jesus, completely and totally. Yeah. And I do think that children are very tuned in to the gospel stories. They have great capacity to understand. They have great compassion, first of all, and great connection to the injustices of the world and what's not fair. They're very tuned into that from an early age. So I think it's actually some cognitive disconnect that we give our children when, we march them by homeless folks. I spent a lot of my life in New York City, and I remember hearing so many questions from the kids that I taught about homeless people in the city, and like, well, why don't they have a home? And then hearing preached in the church a message that's basically saying the whole world should look different, and trying to figure out like what happens in the in-between. I also have a memory of being about that age and really loving my church and the experience of faith. And you hear in that passage the kind of tension between like, this is the most beautiful thing that I've ever been a part of, and also a part of it feels like kind of controlled and sealed off and sort of packed away. One of my favorite liturgical theologians is Aidan Kavanaugh, who's a Catholic theologian, and he talks about he has this amazing quote that we've taken the Lion of Judah and put him in a zoo for children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's like, whoa.
Oh, okay.
But that sense that sometimes we take something, God, who is fundamentally uncontrollable, and try and control the things around God. And then in my tradition growing up, sometimes got very fussy if like, the candlesticks weren't just right, or you didn't bow on the right step. And I think that that belies our anxiety about how uncontrolled God is, and actually what would happen if we kind of open the doors to the practices that we preach. It would in fact turn everything over. So I think those are the questions that drove me to continue to study Christianity and to go to divinity school. I always had the sense that what I was experiencing that was so beautiful and important to me, if my friends who were atheist or agnostic walked in the door, they would just have no idea what was going on. Like none of it would really translate. It would be kind of like another language. And so I think that's where that sort of desire and hunger to create a spiritual community where everything felt very literal. Like if we're talking about a heavenly feast, there's one right in front of us, and everything lines up. Like when we baptize, we use a huge amount of water. So those literal qualities of the liturgy, because the ritual itself has so much power if we kind of unleash it, if that makes sense. And it doesn't need to be explained. Sometimes I think we spend a lot of time teaching people about what it means when all that really needs to happen is for them to experience it.
Right. Yeah. No, I was listening to Kevin read that, Emily, and I flashed back like that was me between like ages of 10 and 13, right?
Really?
As a server, altar boy, and making sure that everything was the way it was supposed to be. That was the most important thing. And I got told a few times afterwards when it wasn't. And as I think about that today, where I am today, and I still love tradition and liturgy and all the pomp and circumstance sometimes that surrounds it. But at the same time, it does have the ability to straitjacket us and take away the imagination. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago with James Smith about our imagination and what all that means for us, that we get so, locked into making sure everything is step on, that we don't have an opportunity to imagine what that feast actually looks like. It's more important that it's set up properly. And so, that's how I was hearing that when I was hearing Kevin read that.
And of course we do. I mean, we're human. I think our inability to fully recognize God is part of being human. So in every denomination, we have ways that we kind of escape truth. But I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I think the church that I grew up in, the liturgy and the Eucharist was kind of the most central piece of what was happening. And all of our attention was kind of focused on making that happen. And sometimes now as a Lutheran, Lutherans are all about grace. And looking back on it, I think like, did we think that we could prevent God from showing up? Because sometimes it felt like if we did it wrong, like God would be like, "Oh, sorry, you did the wrong steps, so I'm not going to come today."
Good night, Chicago.
Exactly. So all the way from that to, I think St. Lydia's was also quite focused on the liturgy and the table and that experience of being kind of immersed in the liturgy. But now at Dreams and Visions, working with a lot of folks who've experienced a ton of trauma, the most important way that God moves in the room is through the stories and the witness of the people who are there. So I've kind of gone on this trajectory from sort of like the centrality of the Eucharist, which of course is still incredibly central to me, to the centrality of the stories. And God shows up in all those places, there's room for all of it.
Right. And there can be that space, and I've experienced it, and I know others have, in the course of a Eucharist where you lose yourself. Yeah. Like there's something so holy and sacred. It's that thin space, as sometimes we like to call it, and you lose yourself in that. Yeah. But then you sometimes get hauled back because you got to make sure that you're genuflecting at that point. Make sure you get the bow in the right spot. It's a beautiful vision that you lay out in that, for sure. I wanted to ask you a little bit about something you wrote at the end of your book. Near the end of your book, you were writing about how, like, what you shared in your book is your story, right? And you said it's not the perfect story, and you weren't the perfect pastor in speaking of the story you were writing. This is a quote from the book. "Stories are the way we make sense of the world. They're the center of our sacred texts, stories of things that Jesus said and did, people he touched, places he went that everyone remembers, but everyone remembers them just a little differently. Stories are not true, but stories are truth." Why do you think it's so important that we tell these stories, that we know our story, and what's so important about these for you?
I think in the process of writing, it became clear to me that there's a reason that we have 4 Gospels. I felt closer than I ever had before to the sense of stories being told in different ways. And when you take on the task of narrating a story, you also, you kind of are flirting with this incredible amount of power to frame and to decide what happened. And the more I wrote, the more I felt deeply uncomfortable with that.
Right.
and I thought, well, how did other people remember this? Like maybe I've got this totally wrong. And there were absolutely moments, where I realized I had remembered something completely differently than what had actually happened. Like I went back and read emails and was like, oh, like this is really different than what I remembered. Yeah. So that kind of flexibility of truth, I think even when the details were wrong, it didn't mean that like the sort of emotional impression of the story that I was telling was then discounted or was false. I made every effort to get the details right, but it kind of opened this door to me onto the Gospels and the fact that we have these 4 different ways of telling the same story. And then even in that, there's interpretations of each Gospel that are like endless, like infinite ways of interacting with that text. And so, yeah, I like to think of truth as kind of being part of that process as opposed to something that we can kind of pin down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, when what strikes me, and you just said it a moment ago before this question, actually, when you were talking about how Dreams and Visions now is focused a little more on story, right? Mm-hmm. It's to take St. Lydia's as an example, and your book as your retelling of your truth, what you experienced in that, it makes it an incredible story. And there are others who may write about it or speak about it and tell that story. As a priest in a congregation, a parish here, I don't know, a couple thousand miles away from New York City, we sat down in this room here and we understood your story in a certain way. Mm-hmm. When we talked about Bridget's Banquet, we said, well, what do we know about St. Lydia's? How did it come to be? Who is it that they serve? How did they get people to come? Mm-hmm. We were asking all these sorts of questions, which now will be a lot easier because we have this book. But I just think that all we have is story. Mm-hmm. And we diminish story if we get too concerned about the truth, like the truth, as if there's a single truth. Yeah. John Moriarty is gone now, but he was a Celtic writer, a fascinating guy if you ever look into him. But you have to read tomes and tomes of writing and pick out these little gems. Mm-hmm. He went to Winnipeg, Manitoba of all places, and I don't know what you know about Winnipeg, but it's a bit of a severe climate. He moved there from Ireland, and he tells a story about being balled up like a chick in an egg. Like he had to leave it, and he walked away from a tenured professorship and went back to Ireland to become a gardener.
Wow.
And in that place, he became a storyteller, and he wrote stories, and they're beautiful. And he, his reality was that, I think it was something like if you stand in this stream long enough, you're going to catch a trout, but it takes a while. And so it's that business of how do we wait for the story to be able to be told in such a way that it captures us and we're captured by the story, So I think that you're an artful storyteller. The book is great. I can't encourage people enough to get it. And St. Lydia's is an incredible place in terms of what you accomplished there. Ian, I think you had a question about the place.
Yeah, bouncing off of St. Lydia's. You and your congregation, the Congregation of St. Lydia's, were involved in combating police brutality and a lack of affordable housing with organizations such as Faith in New York. I would imagine that you have found similar ways to be involved with fighting, these issues in Baltimore. And you are also not far from Washington, where just a little more than a week ago, the president, what a wonderful man,
his name shall not be spoken,
had people tear gas to clear the way for a ridiculous photo op in front of St. John's Historic Church. And
they were pepper bulleted. They were pepper.
That too.
There was no tear gas.
Oh yeah, there was no tear gas.
Yeah,
doesn't count.
Sorry,
right, of course. Can you share what you are feeling right now in light of these issues, and how are you in Dreams and Visions holding up, and how are you responding?
Oh my goodness. I mean, we're furious. Everyone's furious. We're like barely hanging on. We've all been stuck in our homes for 3 months as like the response to a pandemic has been completely botched.
Yes.
And I shouldn't laugh, but like it's so beyond the pale at this point. so many people have died who should not have died, and so many who are vulnerable. It's hit the most vulnerable people the hardest. And then this continued conversation around police brutality, it seems to take just death after death for us to start to make changes as a nation. And then on top of that, the person serving as our president is acting
Stupid.
well, more than that, he is acting very, very stupid and in a very cruel manner, but I think that his actions are very clearly authoritarian. And, everyone's kind of said he used the church and the Bible as a prop, and that's absolutely true. But what's more deeply, I'm definitely concerned about the way that Christianity is used as a tool in our sort of national rhetoric and honestly propaganda at this point. But what's more concerning to me is that he kind of took that backdrop to threaten military violence against the citizens of our nation, which is just 100% right out of the authoritarian playbook. So the only thing I can really do at this point is really recommend that people read an article by Anne Applebaum, which she wrote for The Atlantic, that's called, I believe, let me just pull it up. It's called History Will Judge the Complicit.
Mm-hmm.
She's done
a great article.
Oh, it's amazing. She's done a lot of reporting on authoritarian regimes and the steps that take place in nations. And one of the things that she said that really stuck out to me is that I think Americans have an idea that we are kind of inoculated from authoritarianism because of our Constitution. We think it's kind of magic that like we can never fall. Which as a Christian, like that sounds like sin to me. The idea that like we could never fall, like we could never come down, we could never that could never happen here. It's a very, very dangerous notion. So I think like there's a lot of feelings, but one of them is certainly terror, because I'm very deeply concerned as we head into our November elections about how this chaos that Trump creates will continue to spiral. Yeah. And I am also moved to see the way that the protests are beginning to make change, and so deeply chagrined and apologetic that it's taken this long. So there's many layers of emotion, and I cannot imagine what it would be like to live through this as a Black American. I cannot imagine the emotional toll that would take.
So does it feel a bit different this time? Like, I mean, because some people say, like I know some of our friends, racialized Canadians, say, they say, we hope it does something, but some are so cynical after so many years of the next thing and the next thing. Does this feel different than the last time?
It feels absolutely different from the last time. And I think, one of the common critiques that's thrown at movements that have a strong protest sort of front is that, well, protests don't do anything. And I think that's really an interesting critique, because throughout history, we've seen the way that public uprisings do change the course of history.
100%.
I don't think it's necessarily fair to layer onto an initial protest movement the demand to see policy change. I think that protest plays a particular role, which is to raise something into the consciousness of a nation.
Right.
And, for instance, the Occupy Wall Street movement took a lot of flack for not kind of making policy change, but they introduced the concept of the economic gap into the American, vocabulary.
Into the psyche.
No one was saying the 99% before Occupy Wall Street, put it into the world. So I think that shifting vocabulary is a huge piece of what these movements do, and Black Lives Matter, changed the entire conversation.
Yeah.
And did result in policy change as well. But this does feel different, and it does feel the global, solidarity that we've seen has been incredible. The mass level of the protests across the country has been startling and stunning, and we've started to see, Washington react as well. So
that was sorry, Kevin.
No, go ahead, bud.
I just gonna say that's one of the things I was going to ask, but you've answered it because we watch it from here, what's happening in the States, but you being in it and then seeing it expand across the globe, right? So that in itself is different in that way.
Yeah, and it's humbling to me, because Americans have not treated our neighbors around the globe with respect or dignity, and often we've treated them with violence. And in some ways, that kind of solidarity is it's incredible to see, considering like our role in the global narrative. And it's also it's beautiful to me to see the way that oppressed people and marginalized people around the world have said, like, your fight is my fight, and like I will stand next to you.
That's the connection, isn't it? Yeah, all the other stuff, but that's where people are saying, that's where people are saying we get each other on this level,
right?
Well, that's huge. Yeah.
There's lots of noise, right? There's always enough shit to go around for everybody, but I think that what the both of you you've just articulated it. I mean, the fact is that there's a it's that Ubuntu that Desmond Tutu talked about, right? That your humanity is in my humanity.
Exactly.
I mean, here in the city of London, we're a city of just under 400,000 people, and last Saturday there were 10,000 people down at Victoria Park with signs about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and with stories of our Canadian problems too, and our Indigenous people and all of that. And so it's become this sort of understanding that, look, the institution, the empire, the imperialism that goes with it has gone too far.
Exactly.
And I feel like there's something different in this, but I get the cynicism of those who have been victimized by this for many decades.
Yeah.
The younger ones are finding a voice, is what I'm getting, and I think that they're being heard in ways that 30 years ago some of my colleagues of people who were people of color were not heard. And so I think that there's a different energy right now.
Yeah. And I think the economic gap is pushing us globally to a breaking point where, you know, we have these millionaires running around who are continuing to draw, you know,
billionaires
and millionaires drawing these huge bonuses, huge salaries, while the folks in their warehouses, you know, work for very little. You know, I met a kid in Baltimore who, in Baltimore, there's a lot of people, young men generally, who they're called the squeegee boys.
Yes.
They wash windshields on the sidewalk for money, which has been very difficult during COVID because they're making even less. But one of the squeegee boys I met also moonlights at a shipping factory for. He basically works a night shift at a factory for mailing. Like a mailing factory, and sorts packages.
Oh yeah.
And the stories he told me were ones that sounded like they were from the 1800s, that they don't get bathroom breaks and they're not allowed to have water. Like it's just obscene and immoral. Like the place that we've gone as a nation, certainly, but on a global scale as well. And so I think, we're at the breaking point.
Yeah. So just to pick up on that a little bit, I suppose it really becomes something then that we all have to take ownership of, right? That like, you know, the guy came in earlier with an Amazon package, right?
Yep.
and so, you know, there are things that we need to do differently, which means we have to pay a cost. Like there's a price, like and that's, I think, one of the things that I'm learning as the veil gets pulled back is if I've got privilege, I need to be prepared to pay a price so that others have a better way. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no, I mean, I think I really appreciated what you both said at the beginning of the podcast about this kind of unveiling that's taking place and the fear that's involved in that. And that's something that I experienced in 2014 and 15 during the Black Lives Matter movement in the US. It was a feeling of really not wanting to look and being afraid of what I would see. Because when you open your eyes to the inequities of the world, you also have to do an inventory of your own relationship to that and what you have gained.
Right.
And it is not a pleasant process. No. But what I can say is that, and it continues, no one's ever finished with this process. But what I can say is that for me, after that first initial kind of like gut-wrenching, eye-opening experience, I actually felt relieved and like free in a way that I hadn't before, and awake and aware and able to kind of see a vision of the kind of world that God calls us to live in. So I think, what I want to say to folks who are kind of in that place of like the veil sort of like tearing a tiny bit is like, just keep going, like have courage, like be brave.
Well,
Mhm.
and have the faith to know that we are held by a God who sees us as beloved. You know,
Absolutely.
the guests we had on this week as well, this Angela Kebab from Minneapolis. She says her personal sort of approach is that Jesus is intimately and infinitely concerned about every single one of us, and that is reassuring. You know, that God is infinitely and intimately concerned about every one of us, that none of us are beyond that love. So it's about a vision of flourishing. So the last one I'll ask you sort of out of your book is, we seem to have a theme going in June with our authors. We have Matthew K. Meg on and Diana Butler Bass and Sarah Miles, and so a whole host. And one of the conversations that keeps coming up is around tables, right? And St. Lydia's, of course, was focused on the table. And one of the images that those authors, and I think you pointed out well in your own book as well, is around I forget the exact piece now that I read, but you were talking about how we have to make sacred the things that are right in front of us, like the bread and the wine, and you know, our human experience as sacred, as not as something other that we have to go to some holy place to do it. You know, and I shortly after reading that and some of the work of James Smith, my wife and I threw a couple sandwiches in a bag and walked down to the river here in the woods in one of the trails, and we had a sandwich and a Diet Pepsi, and I said it felt like we had communion. You know, it was right. So it's that idea of how do we extend tables that are flourishing instead of building pyramids, as the way Diana Butler Bass talks about it, or walls K-Meg talks about. We've got Pavlovitz coming on at the end of the month, and he talks about extending a table, right? But you write about this, and I really think the piece that comes out at me is the piece about abundance. Because I think sometimes we're afraid to share our table because we adopt the notion of scarcity, that somehow or another what we have is not enough and we better protect it from everybody else. Talk about the body politic in the United States right now. It's like America first, right? So you wrote, we usually think of abundance as having a lot, an overflowing cornucopia on Thanksgiving, a sumptuous wedding feast, maybe cash raining down from a Vegas slot machine. St. Lydia's showed me abundance in a secret hidden inside of scarcity. It lives tucked inside not enoughness, waiting to show you that God does not do math. Thanks be to God. Abundance is discovering God's provision right in the middle of your own fret and worry. Even when the bank balance is plummeted and the cupboard seems empty, there's always enough to feed everyone. There are some dry beans and a few carrots in the back of the fridge, and we always have bread in the freezer. We can feast on that. I love it. Talk to us about abundance in the midst of scarcity and what it is we need to do to make these places where people can flourish.
Yeah. What you said earlier about, God being present right here in the ordinary places. It's a very Lutheran notion. We talk about earthy sacramentality. But I think that also ties to our conversation about Black Lives Matter, because the sacred is right here with us, like in our neighbor, as opposed to some other place that maybe secretly reflects what we look like as opposed to what others look like. And so I think this question of abundance and scarcity actually starts with that, with seeing God present in our neighbor, as opposed to like in the far off place. I experienced at St. Lydia's over and over and over again that we were always living in this place of like anxiety that there wouldn't be enough. I mean, we were like a very scrappy organization. I was like learning to fundraise as we were building this church in our own storefront in like one of the most expensive cities in the United States. Like the budget was like always right at the front of my mind. And a friend said to me, a check always shows up. Somehow a check always shows up. And I've heard that echoed from so many folks that live in situations that are much more dire than my own. Like God provides somehow. And I think that experience of feeling like there wasn't going to be enough and then realizing that there was, and in fact, there was more than enough over and over again. Like, it's not like it just happened once, it happened all the time. And you start to learn to trust it and to think like, maybe God has given us everything that we need to live. And maybe if we kind of open our hands instead of clenching them closed, like there is enough for everyone. And the scarcity issues that we see in our world actually, kind of shift in a sizable way. So I think if we live that out really tangibly, it changes our whole relationship to the economy and our place in the order of things. And it kind of defangs our relationship to people across borders or people who we've decided are going to take what we have.
Right.
And that's not to say that the scarcity that too many people experience is not real. Like, it is real. But the powers that be have kind of weaponized that scarcity against the wrong people often.
Right.
So we've kind of misdirected our fear and anxiety about who's going to take things from us, when really it's someone way up above us who robbed us before we even realized.
Long before.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, who's really the person we should be looking toward here? So, yeah.
Yeah, and often that fear is it's injected into us by this, culture that we live in. That the fear about scarcity is not really about scarcity; it's about what we might not have tomorrow.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't want to get to tomorrow without anything, so I'm going to do everything I can to hold on to what I do have today. And Jesus said a lot about fear, and it was, do not do that.
Yeah.
It's if anything, he had anything to say about fear, was to check
Have
it,
faith.
folks. Yeah,
Have faith.
instead. Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a curious conversation. That thing right now, I actually just thought about as you were talking, Emily, that in terms of the current call now to defund the police, and you talk about abundance and scarcity, right?
Yeah.
So, when you hear police organizations now say, oh, no, but we need, we need, and then when you look at the funding for children's programs or health, any of those things that have been defunded for decades, and now, this one organization or the military, my gosh, mountains of money, right? Like, you live in Baltimore, so it's like, the whole military industrial complex. So how do we begin to sort of break that down? I mean, there's a lot there, but anyway, that probably is a whole nother podcast.
Oh, exactly. And we're putting our resources and our funding and our money into a fear-based system of, as opposed to a flourishing-based system of investing in education and investing in housing. And, all the research in the world will tell you that when you invest in communities and in people, your need for aggressive policing, well, there's never a need for aggressive policing in my opinion, but your need for that kind of responsiveness at that level is no,
Right. Yeah. So
but for some reason we continue to plow money and resources into that.
So in our context, we just had our bishop on not so long ago, and the Canadian Anglican bishops and Lutheran bishops together sent a letter to the Prime Minister and to the Government of Canada saying that the time for a guaranteed basic income for every Canadian is right now.
Wow.
And that's really because right now the current emergency benefit program is $2,000 a month for every Canadian who needs it. And that's what's being given right now. And what we're saying is now we can see that it can be done. It just requires a pandemic, apparently. And so if we can do it now, if we reorganize how we do this and we look after people and give them a firm floor to stand on, we are going to save it on the policing. We're going to save it on the mental health. We're going to save it on the hospitalization. We're going to save it on the institutionalization, all that stuff. So it's the same sort of conversation. If we live with an idea of abundance over scarcity in terms of having to hoard or protect something, that's where we'll get. Anyway, it's another podcast. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, we go on and on. No, that's good. I wish we could keep going on, but I know Emily, unlike us, probably has a life, and
she has a real life.
Back to, so we want to wrap up a little bit here. But again, Emily, thank you so much for spending the time and offering your gifts to us and your thoughts, and especially your book, which Kevin has said, and I'll echo, has to be picked up by everybody listening today. For all who hunger, searching for communion in a shattered world. Thank you for that gift.
Thank you
to the
so
church
much.
And to the world. So that's great.
Such a lovely conversation. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Can we just do one more thing just before we go? We like to do with this with all of our guests. Just a quick lightning round, a few quick questions, whatever pops off your head in the moment. And there's bonus points if you get the last one right.
Okay. Swear words are permitted.
Oh, wow.
Swear words are permitted. That's right. So,
wait, so I'm answering?
So you're answering.
Yes. Okay.
You're answering the lightning
round
right?
at me. Okay.
Yes. At you. Here we go. So question number one, you're locked in the house for a pandemic. What is your go-to comfort food?
Okay. This is great. mint Kit Kats and marshmallows.
Oh my God, that is awesome.
It is so good.
That is good.
That's a winning
Like,
answer.
Yeah.
Not for like a meal, like that's for a snack. Yeah.
Jerry, what do we got for her? That's a winning question. That's a winning question. Winning answer.
Current book you're reading. What are you reading right now?
Currently I have Native by Caitlin Curtis. Sitting ready for the next thing to read. The last thing I just finished is a beautiful book by Mila Goldberg, which is called Feast Your Eyes. It's fiction. It's incredible. Won a bunch of prizes. Totally beautiful.
Oh,
good. Last show you binge watched?
Ozark.
See, I'm on. I just finished season 2, so don't tell me what's going on.
I won't.
All good. Favorite churchy word?
Oh, that's good. I really love, like, what is it that you do when you
Oh, like the aspergus.
I love an aspergus.
Oh,
yeah, an aspergus, and I love a thurible. I like
thurible. Yeah,
anything
That's a good
swing.
word too. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
My goodness,
yes.
thuribles.
That's right. And finally, we know Kevin mentioned we went to Yale.
Mhm.
So I am, my gosh, that I can say now I am one person separated from Yale. Like I didn't know anybody went to Yale. When I met you. That is awesome. But so you went to Yale. Most favorite alumnus from Yale, and I got a whole list here.
Oh, well, we got to say Polly Murray, right?
Okay, say there you go.
There we go.
Absolutely, yeah. She has a college named after her now, which is so exciting.
That's cool.
Who else came from there, Robbie?
Well,
You got a list?
There were other names like Meryl Streep.
Oh,
to Yale.
yeah.
The Bush boys, who ended up being president, they went to Yale.
Not my favorite.
Paul Newman.
Oh, great
Paul
salad.
Newman? Yeah, great popcorn.
salad dressing. Great,
Yeah,
great
Paul
salad
Newman went
dressing.
from- Yeah, salad dressing and popcorn.
Yeah.
That's all you need,
Claire
along
Danes.
with the
That's
Kit
the
Kat.
Claire Danes is
Claire
another one?
Danes, yeah, that's another one too. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
awesome. Well, Emily, once again, thanks so much for joining us and sharing with us. We wish you all the best. Keep you in our prayers. Take care in Baltimore, and hope you and friends and family are safe. And we'll look forward to maybe chatting with you again if you ever write another one. We'll be in touch.
Oh my
okay?
gosh. Might be a few years.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Yeah, no. Well, here's the thing I can say is I've read a lot of these books over the last 20 years of people who are in the same ilk that you're in. And, you heard me talk about Sarah Miles and Diana Butler Bass, people like that. We're going to be talking about your name the same way in years to come. This is your first, but it's not going to be your last. Your writing is exceptional, and this book is exceptional. And I'm just excited. We're thrilled to have you. So I look forward to having you back when you write the next one. Well, you don't have to wait to write the next one. You can come back anytime you want.
Yeah, you can come back anytime.
Sounds good.
And of course, as always, we want to thank our sponsor, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. So, guys, it's great to have Emily with us. We got another few guests in store before we head into the month of July. Kevin, who's coming up?
Yeah, so we've got coming up for you Karen Gonzalez next week, and Karen is another new author, new to writing. Her book, God Who Sees, is an incredible book. She is a advocate for immigrants. She comes from Guatemala herself as she immigrated to the United States. Just an incredible woman, and you'll look forward to hearing her. And then we have Tony Campolo coming after that. Tony is world-renowned for his books and his speaking engagements, former counselor to President Clinton. Stephen J. Patterson after that. And then to cap the month off, we're going to speak with John Pavlovitz. If you're not following his blog already, I'd encourage you to. He is, you talk about Emily talking about her president. John's very direct.
I've been following him on Twitter, and oh my gosh, it's like boom, boom, boom.
We're in for a treat there.
That'll be fun.
That'll be our last one before we take a break for the month of July. We've had an incredible run here for about 8 or 10 weeks, and we're going to take a little spell through July, but we got a great list of guests coming up. So keep looking for us on SoundCloud and Buzzsprout and iTunes and Spotify and YouTube, of course, now with the video. And don't forget to check out our webpage, www.thevicarscrossing.com, for all the upcoming news.
Very good. He's Ian. He's Kevin. I'm Rob. Thanks so much. God bless you all, and we'll talk to you real soon. And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways
Before you cross that street.